Hi, I'm Zia. I'm protesting for Palestine as a part of the Jewish community, and specifically, I want people to understand that it is not anti-Semitic to be pro-Palestinian. If anything, our Jewish values is what brings me here, because in Judaism there's so much emphasis on Olam Haba, building a better world to come, and to me that means liberation for Palestinians. To me that means not weaponizing the grief of past atrocities and anti-Semitism to further oppression upon Palestinians, especially right now. I saw someone once say that Israel is a machine that transforms grief into power. And that's what we've watched Israel do for the last 75 years, is transform Jewish grief and Jewish suffering into more suffering of Palestinians. That's a big part that I like to emphasize, because I think, especially in the United States, there's been so much propaganda to get both US citizens, and then double the amount of propaganda to get American Jews to support Israel, and to think that Israel means safety for the Jewish people, when in fact Israel means safety for Israel is trying to become an ethno-state, but specifically for white Jews. There's so much documentation of how the treatment of Mizrahi Jews, Arab Jews, Ethiopian Jews is atrocious under Israel. They forcibly sterilized Ethiopian Jews. They do not care about the Jewish people. They want a white Jewish state so that they can build more power. That is what Israel is created for. It is not created for the safety of Jewish people, as we've seen over the last 75 years.
Do you feel like what Israel is currently doing is more endangering Israelis and Jewish people more?
Absolutely. I think that Zionism is dangerous for Jews. I think it breeds more anti-Semitism than it does anything and it also is really counterintuitive to the history of Jews, because Jews are a diasporic people. We have always been a diasporic people. We are a religion, we are not an ethnicity in that way. There are a lot of Sephardic Jews, as I said earlier, Ethiopian Jews. There are so many people that to try to forcibly say that there is one way to look Jewish is anti-Semitic. It is really a deterrent and harm done to the Jewish people. And so what they're trying to do now is only causing more harm, because it's also telling all of these Jewish people that the only way they'll feel safety is if they move to Israel. I have had family that have done that. It's very disappointing. It's very hard to communicate with them about that, because there's just so much propaganda and there's so much generational trauma that is being weaponized against Jews themselves, to think that the only way that they'll be safe is if they support Israel, when in actuality we need to work on making our diaspora community space safe, and we do that through building solidarity. We don't do that through becoming isolationists and thinking that Israel is our only path to safety, community is our path to safety, solidarity is our path to safety.
How important is it that the Jewish community get involved to help Palestine?
I think there's a role for Jewish people to play right now, so that people understand that it is not anti-Semitic to be calling for the end of genocide to the Palestinian people. It seems very wild to have to say that. I think it's important right now for Jews to be supporting Palestinian organizations and uplifting Palestinian voices. We have a voice to play here, but it's also important not to fully center ourselves, and it's frustrating that a lot of people can only hear this message from white Jews and not people of color and Palestinians that have been speaking out and leading this movement for decades. So I think that there's a lot of ways that we have a solidarity role to play, and a role to talk about anti-Semitism and not let it be further weaponized for more genocide.
How did you feel about Hamas's attack? What's your take on that?
It's a very difficult situation, because I don't want to downplay grief and loss of life, but at the same time, it is an amazing, people who have been forcibly under occupations for decades, I believe resistance is justified when people are occupied. They have had the lack of humanity shown to Palestinians, and the way that Palestinians have felt the world turn their eye on them is absolutely heartbreaking. The way that children have been, when they try to protest peacefully, look up the Great March of Return, that the Gazans tried to protest peacefully and were completely unarmed and just shot dead at their borders. Children's, medics, journalists. They had no way to protest peacefully. They went to the UN, they went to international courts. They tried everything to protest peacefully. And eventually, it was either, I've seen so many people speak out, it was be killed or die trying to fight for freedom. And so the fact that these people were able to fight back against the fourth largest military state with all of the security and the spyware, to get to that point of being able to break through the barriers is an incredible act of resistance. And I believe that everything that happened to Israelis is the fault of the Israel government. It is them who have pushed these people into further and further oppression. It is the Israel government who has never recognized the humanity of Palestinians. They have literally spoken about how they see them as animals. It is the Israel government who is responsible for the deaths of those Israelis on October 7th.
No worries if you don't have anything on this one, but could you speak on what it's like from the perspective of being on the left as a Jew, or especially in Israel? I've heard it's difficult.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely, and this is only what I've read and heard as far as what it's like to be a leftist Israeli. There are people who speak out, and there are specifically a lot of people who, Israel has a mandatory conscription that everyone must serve in the IDF, the Israeli Defense Force, and there's an organization of people called Breaking the Silence who are specifically talking about how what repercussions they face when either they've been in the IDF and they speak out afterwards, or people are thrown in jail for most of their lives if they don't join the IDF, because it is truly law. And so that has pushed a lot of people to the left in Israel, and I think that's an important element to note. And also right now there's a lot of information coming out about how Israelis who are protesting or Israelis who are speaking out are facing subjugation from their government. And to me, that really shows that, as Israel likes to tout itself to be the democracy of the Middle East, there's absolutely no democracy in Israel. It is absolutely authoritarian, because anyone who speaks out, even Israeli citizens, are facing a lot of oppression, condemnation, pressure to stay quiet. And so there's no room for that in Israel, for people to have freedom of speech or speak out. And that's not just under this government, as a lot of people like to critique right now. They're just critiquing this one government under Netanyahu, or the more far-right Kohenet that's been in power. It is not just this government. It has been this way for decades. It's been this way since its initial starting point. It is not a democracy. It's a propaganda tool, honestly, for the West, and for the West to have a military outpost in the Swana region. So it's not really that.
How do you feel when people say that this issue is complicated?
Ooh, I say that is a really effective piece of propaganda that has been used over the last entirety of Israel's existence. That is something that both the US and Israel and most Western countries who will not recognize Palestine have said. Basically, to make people feel like they should not speak out about this. They should not try to understand this. It's a way of being, it's kind of patronizing to be like, oh, it's just too complicated for you to understand. You can't read a history book. You can't have an essence of critical analysis. It's a way to scare people. It's a way to get people to think that they have no place to speak up when everyone has a place to speak up in this issue. Our US government gives $3 to $4 million of our taxpayer money a day to Israel. That is money that they consistently tell us that they do not have for housing, for healthcare, for student loan repayments. It is all going to Israel. Every US citizen has a right and a responsibility to speak up on this issue, and there's so many resources out there that show that this issue is not complicated. There is one side that is the fourth largest military, and there is one side that had rocks. And so when people call this a war, that is absolutely more of misconstrued propaganda. This is not a war. This is genocide. This is an occupation, and it is not complicated.